Hey guys, it's Brie. Um, so I wanted to talk about this. I actually filmed a video on this same topic, or tried to, in the car. And that was a mess and I babbled a lot. I'm gonna babble a lot, I know, on this retake, but you know, what are you gonna do? I've been thinking a lot about message fiction as like a concept and an idea, and whether or not it is good or bad for the genre. Because this time of year there gets a lot of like talk thrown around about message fiction. And it's interesting to me, and I want to start off one by saying I'm generally pretty okay with what gets categorized as message fiction. Like those are stories that I like. And I think I have maybe a slightly different view of message fiction as a whole than other people. For me, it's very much a method of moral and ethical transmission, right? Storytelling is fundamentally a way for us to talk about our moral code in a way that is digestible. And so when somebody says that they're tired of message fiction and they just want good old-fashioned fun shoot-'em-ups, it leaves me questioning whether or not that even is a thing. So if you think back to some of our most fundamental stories, right? Fairy tales, legends, things like the Bible or other religious texts, it all comes down to kind of the same idea. We're working to provide a social framework and a moral framework for people to uphold in order to kind of create a stable and sustainable society. And so this is so integral to the history of storytelling that I'm just not sure that you can actually tell a story without there being some sort of underlying message. Not only is it just integral to the history, but I think in a very kind of more plain way, interesting stories have conflict, right? If I told you a story about how I got up and I brushed my teeth and I combed my hair and I went to work and nothing happened, and then I came home and I ate dinner and I cuddled my cat and went to bed, it's not a very interesting story. The stories that engage us as people tend to have conflict, and conflict is fundamentally something that's going to be moral, ethical, or political, because conflict is fundamentally about some sort of imbalance of power, right? Whether it is a struggle to gain power or a struggle to gain leverage, or you know, something more perhaps overt, like the kind of feminist themes that we see in something like Le Guin or Joanna Russ. It all boils down to the same kind of fundamental thing. On top of that, I just don't think that on top of that, I think that the stories that people tend to call out as being message fiction are really selective, right? They tend to be something with diversity in the theme, or feminism in the theme, or you know, something generally, let's face it, identified as left. And that's all well and good, right? I understand that there's a reason that those tend to get called on. But I'm not entirely sure that that in and of itself is legitimate. To point to those and say that we're having too much message fiction, right, ignores the history of things like Robert Heinlein or Orson Scott Card, or hell, George Lucas. Even, you know, there's a long history of vast and varied opinions in speculative fiction in particular, right? Speculative fiction is great because it provides us with a kind of thought exercise. We're allowed to go through these ideas and stretch them to their breaking point and see where things kind of fall apart, to try to illustrate certain ideas about what humanity is. And while not every story is going to be really blatant on its kind of more philosophical aspects, those elements are still there. I mean, when I think of some of the most typical kind of plain action adventure stories, something like Star Wars, right? I fundamentally think about a struggle against totalitarianism. Take, for instance, The Lord of the Rings is a similar story. It's a story about resistance of temptation. As fickle as some of these stories may seem, they all kind of have this similar core that talks about something, right? As humans, I think we're drawn to stories because they allow us to engage with certain questions we have about our own nature. And so to say that anything that exists is not message fiction in its own way seems silly to me. I don't mean to say that, I don't mean to totally brush it off, because I think that there's a couple of real claims that are hidden in the idea of message fiction, but it's not, to me, the problem is much more nuanced than message fiction does or does not, or should not exist. Because I think that what people are getting at is one of two problems. One, they don't like the message that's being told in the story, right? They don't agree with it. It doesn't appeal to them, and so they don't like that story. And that's fine. I'm not going to tell you what to believe or what to think. And the other is that they are looking for a different kind of balance in the plot-driven versus philosophical aspect of their story. And that to me is a matter of taste. Both of these have legitimate reasons. A story that hits too heavy on the philosophical aspects can be a little essay-like, and that's not always what everyone wants in their fiction. Stories that can be too heavy on the plot and not enough on the philosophy can fall flat to a lot of people. They feel like they have no depth. And it's all very much a balancing point and finding that point on the scale that works for you. And so there is something to be said for, this is not my preferred balance. And that to me is a more legitimate claim than I don't agree with this. Because if what you're really saying by I don't like message fiction is I don't agree with this, then what you should be doing, instead of saying, and so this is a fundamentally bad story, is saying, what is it that I don't agree with? Why don't I agree with that? Let me break down that process. As somebody who spent a lot of time studying, in particular, deliberative democracy, which is a political structure by which people openly debate and kind of have constant discourse with one another over certain policy or philosophical aspects, it doesn't make much sense to me to not engage with things you disagree with. It doesn't make them go away. It doesn't make you right. It doesn't challenge the way you think or strengthen your own argument. And so for me, that I disagree with something in a story doesn't mean that I write it off, right? It doesn't make it blatantly message fiction and so I don't have to read it. It means that I should, after reading it, if I choose to pick it up, consider what it is I disagree with and consider it in pretty great detail. Those books that you don't like, I think often are really the ones that provoke you to think the most, and that's a good thing. That is, really the process by in which we test our own hypotheses and our own ideas. But I think, I'm only one perspective, and this is a pretty complicated, reoccurring topic. I certainly, there's a lot more nuance to a lot of the arguments than simply those 2 points that I think they generally boil down to. There's some people who have some really well-articulated ideas. I started thinking about this in particular, not just because I think about it every time the Hugos is happening, because it seems to show up every time we talk about the Hugos, but also because de Bedard, who wrote House of Shattered Wings, posted a Reddit article or a Reddit post to Twitter, and I clicked through and I read through it, and it mentioned kind of this idea that women write message fiction in higher proportions than men, and responds to that idea. And it just got me thinking. I've been thinking about this actually a lot lately. I thought about it a lot last year with the puppies thing. It's an idea that fascinates me, and like I said, my background kind of lends itself to me thinking too much probably about the topic. But I'm interested in your thoughts and really doing this as a discussion, because I think it's a worthwhile discussion to have. I think most discussions are worthwhile discussions to have. So just leave me your ideas, because I'm really interested in both sides of the argument. And I hope you're having a fantastic reading week. You know the drill. Comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.